On November 20, 1943, Special Duty Ensign Kiyoshi Odas held his binoculars as he observed an extraordinary scene unfold on Betio Island within Tarawa Atoll. The morning mist revealed unusual mechanical creatures advancing from the lagoon's waters, their treads crushing through the coral reef, which had long been a cornerstone of Japanese defensive tactics for 18 months. "The god of death has arrived," murmured a soldier nearby, his voice barely perceptible amid the distant hum of diesel engines. For 3 years, Imperial Japanese Navy doctrine had asserted that coral reefs were impenetrable natural barriers, preventing American landing crafts from reaching shore and forcing troops to wade through chest-deep waters while enduring relentless gunfire. However, on this humid morning, these assumptions were shattered by machines the Japanese could scarcely have envisioned. Years later, Ensign Kiyoshi Odas would recall the meticulous planning that preceded the assault. The defenders had anticipated an American invasion at high tide and prepared accordingly to minimize casualties for their forces. They knew that landing at high tide would provide a temporary beachhead with fewer obstacles. The coral reef encircling Betio stretched from 500 to 800 yards offshore, forming a killing zone where Japanese gunners had pre-registered their weapons' targets and laid out mines and obstacles. This terrain was believed to offer mathematical certainty of victory. At 851, the first landing vehicle, tracked LVTS or alligators, emerged from the water onto the reef. Over the course of that morning, approximately 125 of these amphibious vehicles approached Betio, transporting the initial 3 waves of the 2nd Marine Division. To the Japanese defenders observing from their positions, it appeared as though the laws of warfare had suddenly changed without warning. The transformation in Pacific Island defense began earnestly following the loss of Guadalcanal in February 1943. Recognizing their inability to sustain offensive operations across such vast distances, Japanese military strategists adopted a new doctrine known as Zei-Kokuboken, or Absolute National Defense Sphere. Islands were reimagined as unsinkable aircraft carriers with fortified beaches and coral reefs, serving as natural tank traps deemed impenetrable by any invading force. Rear Admiral Shibazaki arrived on Betio in September 1943 to take command of the Japanese garrison, which included 1,122 naval infantry from the 3rd Special Base Force, 1,497 sailors from the 7th Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force, and approximately 24 Korean and Chinese laborers from the 111th Pioneers Construction Unit and 4th Fleet Construction Department. A veteran of amphibious operations during the late 1930s China campaigns, Shibazaki was well-versed in both the strengths and weaknesses of beach assaults. Standing on Betio's northern shore in September 1943, he had every reason to feel confident. The island, stretching only 800 yards at its widest point and about 2.5 miles long, had been transformed into one of the most heavily fortified positions in the Pacific. The island boasted 500 pillboxes, 14 coastal defense guns including 4 massive 8-inch Vickers guns, and defensive positions crafted from concrete, steel, coconut logs, and coral rock. Shibazaki's confidence stemmed primarily from the reef. In a speech to his troops, he boldly stated that it would take 1 million men 100 years to conquer the island, a claim based on thorough analysis of amphibious warfare principles. The Japanese had meticulously examined every significant amphibious operation throughout history. The British defeat at Gallipoli, Germany's inability to cross the English Channel, and even Japan's own struggles with river crossings in China. These examples all illustrated that well-defended water barriers were nearly insurmountable. American Higgins boats drew 4 feet of water and could not navigate past the reef closer than 300 yards from shore, even at high tide. The arithmetic seemed unassailable. Men moving through water at about 2 miles per hour would take at least 5 minutes to cover 300 yards, while under intense fire from machine guns, mortars, and pre-registered artillery. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, the United States Marine Corps had quietly transformed amphibious warfare since 1940. This innovation began not in a military lab, but in the Florida Everglades, where an inventive millionaire named Donald Roebling developed a rescue vehicle for hurricane victims called the Alligator. By 1935, this civilian rescue craft was adapted by the Marines and evolved into the Landing Vehicle Tracked, LVT, by 1941. Japanese intelligence had failed to notice this development. Their assessments of American amphibious capabilities were based solely on observations from Wake Island in 1942 and reports from German allies about the Dieppe raid. The idea of a tracked vehicle capable of traversing water and reefs simply did not factor into Japanese military strategy. While Japanese forces spent months refining their reef defenses, mining channels, setting obstacles, and registering artillery on specific grid squares where landing craft would ground, the Americans were producing LVTs in mass quantities that rendered these efforts obsolete. At 840 hours, Japanese defenders spotted American landing craft organizing into assault waves just beyond the coral reef. This scenario was precisely what they anticipated. However, an unexpected turn of events unfolded. Rather than stopping at the reef's edge to disembark their troops into the water, the first wave of landing crafts proceeded to crawl onto it. Private Don Crane, piloting LV-T-41 in the lead group, battled against a strong headwind and current as he navigated through the lagoon channel towards what would prove to be one of Tarawa's most perilous stretches of coastline. Inside his amphibious vehicle, Crane was unaware that his actions were about to dismantle 3 years of meticulously crafted Japanese defensive strategies. As the LV-T-41 plowed over the reef at a sluggish but relentless 4 miles per hour, machine gunners and mortar teams prepared for combat, their weapons set up to cover water crossings rather than vehicles advancing on the reef itself. This rendered their pre-calculated kill zones obsolete almost immediately upon encountering these unexpected developments. By 900 hours, it was becoming increasingly clear to Japanese commanders that a significant miscalculation had occurred. The initial 3 waves of LVTs managed to deliver Marines directly onto the beach without engaging the reef's killing zone at all. In his command post, Admiral Shibazaki struggled to make sense of the disjointed reports streaming in. He could scarcely believe that American forces were not wading through water, but instead driving straight onto the beaches. The coral barrier, which had served as the cornerstone of their defensive strategy, was rendered ineffective within minutes by these unforeseen circumstances. Shibazaki ordered through a runner to destroy the incoming forces on the beach, but his communication lines were already compromised due to the ongoing bombardment. However, the Japanese positions, configured primarily for firing at troops in water, struggled to effectively engage targets that had reached land. The years of rigorous training and thousands of hours dedicated to preparation became obsolete because of an unknown vehicle. Kiyoshi Suda, who survived the battle as part of the transport division within the Sasebo 7th Special Naval Landing Force, recounted that up to half of his unit perished in just 1 hour during the initial attack from their fortified pillbox near the base of the main wharf. The psychological shock was just as severe as the tactical surprise. Japanese military culture valued meticulous preparation and mastery over anticipated scenarios. Yet none could have prepared for this unforeseen situation. There were no training manuals that explained how to combat an enemy capable of ignoring geographical barriers. As the morning progressed, Japanese defenders tried to adapt to their impossible circumstances. Naval artillery pieces meant for engaging ships at sea attempted to target individual LVTS advancing across the reef, while 47mm anti-tank guns positioned to cover the beaches found their fields of fire obstructed by protective seawalls. Out of the initial 125 LVTS that launched the assault, only 35 remained operational by the end of the first day. Despite inflicting significant losses on the enemy, the Japanese defense was far from sufficient to halt the invasion. Furthermore, follow-up waves of conventional landing craft could now approach closer to shore due to protective fire provided by LVTS already established on the beach. The meticulously planned defensive strategy fragmented into disjointed pockets of resistance. Admiral Shibazaki's command post suffered a direct hit from naval artillery around 1,300 hours, killing him along with his entire staff. As a result, individual units fought separate battles against an adversary employing tactics they had never encountered before. The sudden appearance of the LVTS at Tarawa was not merely a tactical surprise, but rather a clash between two fundamentally distinct approaches to warfare. Japan, lacking resources and technological advantages, had based its Pacific defense on the belief that natural barriers combined with human courage could offset material disadvantages. However, the emergence of the LVTS dismantled this philosophy with ruthless efficiency. These vehicles, manufactured in converted food machinery facilities, and powered by aircraft engines assembled by workers who had previously built orange juice extractors, represented an industrial capability that Japan could not replicate. The larger LVTS water buffalo deployed at Tarawa weighed 32,500 pounds, accommodated a crew of 6, and could transport 24 fully equipped troops or carry 5,000 pounds of cargo. Producing just one such vehicle required steel, aluminum, rubber, and precise manufacturing processes that Japan's wartime economy could no longer supply. News of Tarawa's defeat reached other Japanese garrisons across the Pacific within weeks, but the full significance of the LVTS threat took time to register. The rigid nature of military doctrine in Japan did not facilitate quick changes. Many commanders regarded Tarawa as an anomaly and maintained that better preparation and a higher fighting spirit would overcome American material superiority. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Said, on Saipan, received detailed reports about the LVTS in December 1943. His response was to order more mines laid along the reef approaches and additional anti-tank weaponry positioned near the beaches. Yet he remained convinced that the reef barrier would slow any invasion sufficiently for his forces to counterattack effectively. The Japanese Navy's technical department attempted to devise countermeasures, including underwater explosive nets designed to entangle LVT tracks and specialized coral-penetrating mines. However, none of these proposals progressed beyond the planning stage due to Japan's inability to produce new weapons systems while sustaining existing production. June 15, 1944, at 542 hours, Saipan in the Mariana Islands was approached by an even more formidable American amphibious force. By June 1944, Saipan saw the deployment of 719 amphibious vehicles, including the new LV T-4 with a rear ramp for troops to disembark safely, and the LVT Aminus-4 equipped with a 75mm howitzer for direct fire support. Unlike at Tarawa, these were not makeshift machines but purpose-built war machines, some mounted with tank turrets and others carrying howitzers. They moved in coordinated formations, using radios to achieve tactical coordination that the Japanese could not match. Japanese defenders observed as LVTA-4s launched their 75mm cannons into bunker openings. The coconut logs and coral rock that had withstood small arms and mortars crumbled under the relentless barrage from these amphibious tanks. Coral reefs, once considered impenetrable barriers, transformed into thoroughfares for American armor. By September 1944, when U.S. forces advanced towards Peleliu, the Japanese had shifted their tactics to accommodate rather than counter LVTS. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, commanding the Peleliu garrison, meticulously analyzed reports from Tarawa, Saipan, and Guam. He concluded that holding the beaches was futile. Therefore, he positioned only a single battalion along Peleliu's shores as a delaying unit, retreating his main defenses to the Umerbragal ridges, where LVTS could not operate effectively. This strategic adjustment turned Peleliu into one of the most brutal engagements of World War II, but was essentially an acknowledgement of defeat. Coral reefs that were once deemed unassailable now served merely as temporary hurdles. In the assault on Peleliu, 241 troop-carrying LVTS from the 1st, 6th, and 8th Amphibious Tractor Battalions participated, with 26 units reported destroyed. This loss rate would have been catastrophic for conventional landing craft, but was deemed acceptable for vehicles that had already offloaded their troops on shore. The real nightmare for Japanese strategists was not just the LVTS themselves, but what they symbolized. By late 1944, American factories were churning out 500 LVTS per month. Each of these vehicles demanded extensive manufacturing capabilities and involved thousands of components sourced from various U.S. manufacturers. Every LVT required more steel than Japan allocated for an entire infantry company's yearly equipment needs. The Japanese military had entered the war believing that spiritual superiority, or Yamato Damashi, could overcome material disadvantages. However, the sight of hundreds of LVTS cutting through waters previously deemed impassable revealed that such beliefs were no match for technological realities. On February 19, 1945, at 859 hours in Iwo Jima, American forces deployed over 500 LVTS in their initial assault waves. The volcanic ash that blanketed the island's shores would have ensnared conventional landing vessels, yet tracked vehicles managed to ascend the steep slopes, their treads securing grip where wheels would have floundered. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi's Japanese defenders had gleaned lessons from every preceding island conflict. They refrained from contesting the beaches robustly, and instead withdrew to fortified positions deeper within the island. This was an implicit admission that American amphibious capabilities had advanced beyond what Japan could counter at sea. April 1, 1945, at 830 hours. Okinawa represented the final major Japanese defensive stronghold before the home islands. By then, the defenders no longer seriously contested the shoreline. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had analyzed every amphibious assault since Tarawa. His conclusion was grim. The Americans would land wherever and whenever they pleased. The invasion force converging on Okinawa's coast comprised more than 1,300 landing vehicle tracked, LVTS, units of various types. They arrived in successive waves that seemed unending, including amphibious tractors, tanks, and trucks. The Americans had engineered machines capable of surmounting any natural obstacle. Beyond their tactical utility, the LVTS delivered a psychological blow from which Japanese military confidence never fully recovered. Coral reefs encircling Pacific islands were thought to offer divine protection for Japan's empire, signaling favor by the gods. When these mechanical vehicles traversed such reefs, it wasn't just defensive lines that shattered. An entire conception of the war effort was dismantled. If machines could conquer nature itself, what hope did Japan have? The appearance of LVTS on island after island fostered a sense of inevitability among Japanese defenders. With young conscripts arriving at their posts, already demoralized by tales of invincible swimming tanks. Maintaining morale among officers became increasingly challenging, as their troops realized the inevitability of losing control over the beaches, regardless of their efforts. Even after seizing or inspecting damaged LVTS vehicles, Japanese forces found it hard to comprehend the industrial production system behind them. These vehicles utilized interchangeable parts that facilitated mass manufacturing. Although the armor was relatively thin, it proved adequate for its purpose. Each component bore clear signs of large-scale machine production. At the outset of the war, Japan possessed a total of 27 Zero tanks. By the end, the United States had produced more than 18,000 LVTS alone, vehicles that did not exist in military planning prior to 1940. This statistic highlighted the industrial disparity that ultimately crippled Japan's Pacific defense strategy. The inability to foresee or counteract the threat posed by LVTS underscored a broader strategic misjudgment within Japanese military thinking. The imperial forces had designed their entire defensive posture around anticipated patterns of island warfare, which they believed would favor the defender, particularly when fortified by coral reefs. Admiral Yoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, acknowledged after the war that they prepared for a conflict they expected rather than one that materialized. When American forces refused to adhere to the Japanese rules of engagement and simply drove over obstacles deemed insurmountable, Japan's entire strategy disintegrated. This strategic blunder stemmed from a fundamental misinterpretation of American military culture, wherein Japanese planners viewed challenges as obstacles to endure, while Americans saw them as problems to be solved. Coral reefs that were intended to impede the American advance instead prompted the adaptation of a hurricane rescue vehicle into an effective weapon. Behind these strategic and technological failures lay human experiences. Japanese soldiers witnessed their meticulously prepared defenses becoming obsolete in mere minutes. Many were conscripts, young men barely out of school, who were told that the beaches would hold firm, that the reefs would offer protection, and that their sacrifices would have meaning. These inexperienced troops faced not only imminent death, but also profound psychological trauma from witnessing everything they had been taught rendered obsolete. The Bushido Code, which promised spiritual resilience against material inferiority, offered little solace when confronted with hundreds of amphibious vehicles overwhelming defenses that had taken months to construct. The Landing Vehicle Tract, LVT, marked an unparalleled milestone in military history. It showcased the capacity of industrial might to overcome natural defensive barriers that had long been considered insurmountable. For centuries, military strategists relied on terrain features like water obstacles to enhance their tactical positions. When faced with coral reefs off Tarawa and other islands that should have rendered amphibious landings impossible, American engineers designed vehicles capable of traversing these challenges. Vice Admiral E.L. Cochrane, who served as the chief of the U.S. Navy Bureau of Ships during World War II, emphasized unequivocally that victories at Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Palau, and Iwo Jima would not have been achievable without the LVTS Amtraks. This innovation went beyond mere battle success. It redefined what was possible in warfare. The Japanese had assumed their defensive positions, based on specific geographic advantages, were impregnable. However, the effectiveness of the LVTs demonstrated that with enough industrial prowess, no advantage is absolute, but rather a matter of engineering solutions. By early 1945, even before the atomic bombs struck, many Japanese officers realized the war was lost. This conclusion wasn't solely based on the successive defeats in island battles. It stemmed from how these battles were being lost. American forces often bypassed Japanese defenses, rather than overcoming them outright. This realization caused a rift within the Japanese military leadership, with some resorting to suicidal tactics like kamikaze attacks, and others preparing quietly for surrender due to first-hand observations of overwhelming American material superiority. Post-war, when American occupation forces discovered detailed Japanese analyses of LVT tactics and technology, they were surprised. Despite lacking the means to counteract these vehicles effectively, Japanese military engineers meticulously documented every aspect of American amphibious machinery that was observable. A report compiled by the Navy Technical Department in July 1945 concluded that the LVTs represented a revolution in military operations comparable to the advent of gunpowder. This development rendered traditional defensive tactics ineffective and gave attackers an insurmountable edge through conventional means. These insights subsequently shaped Japan's post-war industrial growth. Numerous engineers who had worked tirelessly to counter American LVTs went on to contribute significantly to the country's automotive sector, drawing upon lessons from analyzing American mass production methods. For those Japanese veterans who endured island battles, the recollection of LVTs remained acutely painful. It was not merely their defeat, but also the manner in which it transpired, seeing their supposedly impregnable defenses crumble as American vehicles advanced with ease. This profound sense of betrayal, encompassing both military defeat and the erosion of a deeply held worldview, lingered for decades among these veterans. Many found it difficult to reconcile their wartime experiences with Japan's post-war adoption of industrial capitalism, which had earlier vanquished them. The effectiveness of LVTs in Pacific operations spurred global advancements in amphibious warfare techniques. The Soviet Union, after studying Pacific war tactics, created its own line of amphibious vehicles. Meanwhile, the British, who faced challenges during their European amphibious campaigns, embraced American LVT technology for potential Southeast Asian missions. During the Korean War, Japanese factories under U.S. contracts manufactured components for new generations of these vehicles. Engineers who had once fiercely opposed LVTs now played a role in their production. Ironically, decades after the war, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, responsible for constructing numerous fortifications on Pacific islands during the conflict, developed amphibious vehicles for civilian disaster relief purposes, aligning with Donald Roechling's original concept for his alligator vehicle. Designed to rescue victims of tsunamis and floods, these vehicles integrated knowledge from both American LVT designs and Japanese defensive strategies against them. In a way, military technology that had once brought devastation to the Pacific found new life in humanitarian efforts, constructed by the very nation it had previously defeated. The inability of the Imperial Japanese forces to foresee or counteract the LVTs threat underscores enduring lessons about innovation in warfare and the risks associated with rigid assumptions. Their entire Pacific defense strategy was predicated on coral reefs being insurmountable barriers. When American industry devised a straightforward solution to this complex challenge, their strategic framework fell apart completely. Modern military strategists view the surprise introduced by the LVT as a cautionary tale regarding technological disruption in warfare. Much like how the Japanese were unprepared for vehicles capable of traversing both land and water. Contemporary armed forces must remain vigilant against the assumption that current defensive strengths will endure indefinitely. The disparity between American production of LVTs and Japanese countermeasures encapsulates the industrial mismatch during World War II's Pacific theater. From 1941 to 1945, the United States manufactured over 18,000 LVTs. Peak production reached 500 units per month in early 1944, facilitated by 8 major manufacturing plants and primary contractors, such as Food Machinery Corporation and Borg-Warner. The Japanese attempted to develop specialized anti-LVT weaponry, but none entered production. Nor did they devise effective tactical responses or produce their own amphibious vehicles. During key battles like Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the LVT played a crucial role with varying numbers deployed in each operation. 125 at Tarawa, 719 at Saipan, 241 at Peleliu, over 500 at Iwo Jima, and more than 1,300 at Okinawa. Japanese defensive strategies assumed troops would disembark from distances of 300 to 800 yards offshore, expecting high casualty rates, 60 to 80%, from crossing reefs under enemy fire within 5 to 10 minutes. However, the LVT's capabilities rendered these assumptions obsolete, landing directly on beaches with negligible casualties, less than 10%, and crossing times reduced to 3 to 5 minutes. The Japanese military tradition emphasized spiritual resilience over technological advancement, relying heavily on natural defenses like coral reefs. When American LVTs first breached Betio's reef on November 20, 1943, it marked not just a physical breach, but also shattered the Japanese worldview of invincibility provided by their geography. Every subsequent amphibious assault reinforced this lesson. In modern warfare, no permanent advantages exist, only temporary challenges awaiting innovative solutions. Young Japanese soldiers who perished defending seemingly impregnable positions on islands like Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were casualties of both American firepower and their leaders' inability to foresee such technological advancements. Promised protection by nature's defenses, they instead witnessed American vehicles easily navigating through coral reefs and delivering overwhelming force. In essence, the LVT symbolized more than just superior technology. They embodied a fundamentally different approach to warfare, one that regarded obstacles as problems to be overcome rather than insurmountable barriers. Coral reefs dotting the Pacific now lie peacefully beneath tropical waters, but serve as enduring reminders of Japan's strategic misjudgments. The day the Japanese realized that even natural fortifications could not withstand American industrial might mark a critical turning point in their defeat. The unexpected amphibious capabilities turned what were once perceived as insurmountable barriers into mere temporary hindrances to America's relentless advance across the Pacific. By making the impossible seem routine, these LVTs demonstrated that Japan's eventual downfall was inevitable, a stark wake-up call delivered by machinery they had never anticipated. The disappointment stemming from unmet expectations played a more significant role than any individual battle in determining how the Pacific War concluded, resulting in the total defeat of an empire that had bet everything on outdated assumptions rendered irrelevant by American innovation within the time frame it took to traverse with a tracked vehicle from sea to sand.